"You'll die alone," he taunted, mocking my childless life. His wife left him. He begged to move in. I handed him an eviction notice instead. My sibling made fun of me because I wasn't a parent, claiming I'd end up all by myself. After his wife decided to get a divorce, he tried to move in with me. I, however, gave him an eviction notice. You know how those family events sometimes feel a bit awkward? It's like there is always that one discussion that's uncomfortable, like everyone senses things are about to get messy, but no one knows how to prevent it. Well, that's precisely how my Thanksgiving dinner went last year. Things began pretty calmly with the usual family talk. How's your job? How's your significant other? Any fun vacation plans? But as the night went on, and people loosened up a bit with the wine, the conversation started to head into less friendly areas. Just like always, my brother Nathan turned it toward me, more specifically about my lack of children. Now, I don't mind when people inquire about my life decisions, but there's a big difference between being interested and being patronizing. Nathan, with his wife Anna and their 3 kids, always acted like he was the one with all the answers. It appeared the secret to his formula was kids, getting married, and doing everything by a certain age. Since I was in my early 30s, still unattached, without children and living my life how I liked, he had so many opinions. He never kept them to himself. On that particular night, Nathan laid it on me with the familiar comments. "You really should think about settling down and having children, Ryan. It's not too late. Believe me. I don't want to become someone who looks back with regrets." He tossed that off pretty easily, you know, almost like it was just another throwaway comment. But here's the thing, I'd gotten this same lecture before. Numerous times, in fact, and with each repetition it felt more intrusive. I attempted to dismiss it, to let it go. I truly did. "Sure, yeah, I'll remember that," I responded, plastering a smile on my face. But Nathan wouldn't drop it. "Seriously, Ryan?" He got closer, a bit over-enthusiastically. "You will regret this, you know. You'll wind up all by yourself, surrounded by cats when you're old. I'm warning you, you'll be the one stuck at home, looking at your friends' photos of their kids on social media and questioning why you didn't do it sooner." I can't quite put my finger on why it affected me so strongly at that moment. Perhaps it was his delivery, as if my entire existence had been a failure, or maybe it was the idea of dying alone. But something inside me just broke. For a fraction of a second, my composure began to crack. I'd played the agreeable role for far too long, letting Nathan get away with these jabs at how I lived my life. It was always just a joke, wasn't it? But not this time. I felt my fingers tighten around my wine glass. "I'm really not concerned about being alone," I stated, trying to keep my voice calm, but something in my tone must have altered. "I'm doing perfectly well, actually. Just because my life doesn't conform to your standards doesn't mean it's flawed." The quiet at the table became overwhelmingly obvious. I could feel everyone staring at me. Mom, across from me, gave me that familiar, anxious look that always appeared when things were about to get heated. Anna, Nathan's spouse, fidgeted in her chair, clearly attempting to avoid any direct gazes. Nathan wouldn't back down. A smug grin spread across his face. "You know, Ryan, I'm just being practical here. I don't want to envision you by yourself as you get older. I mean, just look at me. I've got Anna, I have the kids. This is the ideal existence. This is the way things are supposed to be." I could feel my cheeks getting warm. A part of me wanted to argue, to tell him everything. How I wasn't lacking anything at all. How I was happy with the life that I had created. But I didn't, I just let it be. What else was there to say? I'd tried to explain it before, and it never worked. He was so fixed in this family-oriented view that he just wouldn't understand that some folks just don't want the same things, and I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to persuade him. As the night dragged on, I tried to forget about it. But what Nathan said just stuck with me like some kind of irritation I couldn't get rid of. "You'll die alone," he'd said. It no longer seemed funny. It felt like a judgment. It felt overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the sensation that he was looking down on me because I didn't have children. I went to sleep that night with a queasy feeling in my gut. It wasn't the first time Nathan had ever made a remark like that. I knew this wouldn't be the final time something like this occurred, but this situation felt different. I sensed a change within me. A voice in my head declared, "No more." I had been silent and agreeable for too long. Why was I letting him get away with disregarding my life as if it held no value? A week went by, and I still couldn't stop replaying that conversation in my mind. I kept urging myself to forget about it, to let it go. But it was impossible. The more I considered the situation, the more something became clear. This wasn't simply about the topic of children. This was about respect. Nathan had stepped over a boundary, and for some reason I knew I had to take action. What exactly that action would be, however, I didn't know yet. But I would figure it out eventually. And as it turned out, I didn't have to wait too long. A few weeks after that Thanksgiving gathering had elapsed, I had made an effort to disregard Nathan's remarks, attributing them to his typical habit of offering unwanted help regarding my life. But the more I reflected on it, the more irritated I grew. It wasn't just the teasing about my personal decisions. It was the idea that since he had children, his life was somehow better, more fulfilled, or more correct. I didn't require his validation, yet the way he delivered his judgment toward me, as if I had somehow failed, really bothered me. Yet here's the kicker. I'm not one to engage in arguments about this type of stuff. I don't look for any drama, and I certainly didn't want to create any tension within the family. So I just held my tongue and kept moving forward. Or at least I tried to. Then came the phone call. It was a Friday evening. Around 9 p.m., I was on my couch, unwinding from a tough work week when my phone started ringing. It was Nathan, and he rarely phoned unless it was important, so I picked up with a little bit of apprehension. "Hey man, you got a moment?" Nathan's voice sounded strange, as if he didn't know how to begin whatever he needed to tell me. "Yeah, what's going on?" I answered, trying to sound calm, even though I had no clue where this was headed. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something." Honor and I, he hesitated and then took a long, deep breath. "We're getting a divorce." I won't lie, I was completely shocked. Divorce? For Nathan and Anna, they seemed like the ideal couple, or at least that's how it appeared from the outside. Their home was always immaculate, and their children were well-behaved, at least when they weren't yelling at the dinner table, and they appeared to have this easy, happy family life down to a science. I never thought I'd get news like this from him. "What happened?" was all I could manage to say. "Things have been going on for a while," he responded, his voice starting to crack a little. "I didn't want to mention anything earlier, but Anna and I, there's simply too much. We've been arguing constantly, and well, she wants out. She's going to file for divorce." I sat there for a moment, trying to absorb what he had just told me. Divorce wasn't exactly a light topic, and Nathan sounded like he was struggling. The truth of it began to sink in. This was the same Nathan who had made fun of decisions I'd made in my life, the one who'd acted like having a family that was the only way things were supposed to be. Now he was falling apart, and I was expected to somehow be his anchor, the one to put him back together. It felt odd, even disturbing. "Geez," I said, attempting to sound sympathetic, "I feel terrible." Divorce wasn't a breeze for anyone, particularly when children were involved. Though I felt for him, I didn't know the best way to handle this. I had my own struggles to navigate. "Yeah, thanks," Nathan answered. There was a short silence before he spoke again, his voice softer. "Listen, Ryan, I understand this is a lot, but I have nowhere else to go currently. Anna threw me out. Right now I'm crashing with a friend, but it isn't working out. I truly can't cover costs on my own. I'm in a tough situation, so do you think I could crash at your place for a bit? Just until I get back on my feet again." My thoughts spun around in my head. My immediate impulse was to say no. I didn't want to be involved in this. I had my own life to handle. And honestly, I didn't want Nathan staying in my place, particularly after all the issues with his past remarks. However, another side of me surfaced. A part of me that still cared about family, even when everything was complicated, felt a desire to help. I observed how defeated he looked, and I knew he likely had no other options. Divorce wasn't something people could easily recover from right away, especially with kids in the mix. The central question kept replaying in my mind. Did he even respect me enough to ask this of me? Or was this just another instance of him thinking I would immediately prioritize his needs? It was hard to say. What I did know was Nathan wasn't the kind to easily admit he was wrong. So this must have been a serious situation if he was reaching out to me. I also knew I wouldn't allow him to take advantage of me again. Those limits I had established following the Thanksgiving meal weren't just a one-time thing. I'd finally stood up for myself, and I wouldn't jeopardize that just because he was facing a problem. Following a moment of silence, I responded, attempting to keep my tone even. "I don't know, Nathan. You know I'm willing to help you, but I don't want things to get messy. I've carved out my own life, and I've been keeping it exactly how I like it. This is a big request." "I understand, man," he said quickly. "I see. I get it. I understand. I really do, but I promise it'll only be a short time. I just need a place to stay for a little while, and I'll sort things out after that. It's just everything's going wrong right now, and I'm barely managing." I could sense the despair in his tone. It felt as though he was begging me, but not in a way that felt right. It was more like I was being forced into agreeing. And the awful thing, part of me was actually thinking about it. However, something else was bothering me as well. Nathan had this method of asking for favors, this subtle pressure that made you feel bad for even thinking about saying no. He had this way of subtly manipulating people I hadn't realized. It was this realization that made me pause even longer than I already had. Let me give this some serious consideration. Finally, I said, my voice sounding calm despite my thoughts racing. I'll call you tomorrow. The following day, I found myself spending a significant amount of time assessing my choices. On one side, I knew how much family meant to me. Conversely, I refused to be taken advantage of. The more I contemplated the situation, a realization hit me. I wouldn't allow him to just appear and use my place as a temporary solution to his life's issues, especially since he'd never truly shown me any consideration or value for the decisions I'd made previously. I wasn't sure exactly what I would end up doing, but one thing was certain. No matter what, it wasn't going to mirror the past. Things would be different this time. The days that followed Nathan's request were a whirlwind. My thoughts kept circling around this whole thing. I'd spent so much time convincing myself that I wasn't going to let him manipulate me once more, yet every time I remembered his voice, the intense need in it. When I thought about how much he needed support when things went wrong, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. I had consistently been there for him. I'd been the one who showed up at his place to help after the arrival of their first child. I was the one who brought food over when they were unwell. After all, we were family. But then I would remember that Thanksgiving dinner. That memory of Nathan with his smirk ridiculing my life decisions, him flippantly saying that I'd end up alone because I didn't have kids, was unforgettable. My stomach was churning, and even if I was willing to give him a hand now, I wasn't certain I could just erase what had happened. I wasn't his personal good deed, and this wasn't solely about his troubles anymore. I eventually made the decision to return his call. I wouldn't leave him dangling forever, but I needed to clarify a few points first. "Hey, Nathan," I said, attempting to keep my voice even but resolute. "I've been mulling over your circumstances, and I do want to support you, but we need to establish some clear ground rules here. You can stay with me temporarily, but I don't want things to become complicated. I have my own life, and I won't be your emotional outlet or your caretaker. If you're going to stay here, I need you to honor my privacy and my house rules. Are we in agreement?" There was a significant delay on the other end. I could hear Nathan inhaling and exhaling, likely trying to maneuver this to his advantage. It was obvious this wasn't the response he'd anticipated. "Absolutely, man," he finally responded. "I understand. I'll respect your boundaries, I swear." I wasn't completely certain, yet I gave my consent to allow him to stay for a short period, just enough time to help him get back on his feet. I kept needing to convince myself that family mattered, and I didn't want to be the one who deserted Nathan. But in my heart, I had a feeling this wouldn't be as straightforward as him just temporarily staying over at my place. When he arrived, I was already on edge. He came with some bags looking a bit rough. I noticed a loss of his typical assurance. He seemed worn out, stressed, and honestly a bit hopeless. I tried my best not to pity him. Even though I did feel bad, I couldn't let it affect my thinking. I had my own responsibilities, and my life wouldn't become his fallback plan. We had a calm dinner that evening, just the two of us. At first, it was uncomfortable. Nathan wasn't someone who easily shared his emotions, and I wouldn't push him, especially given the lingering strain between us. But little by little, he started discussing the divorce about Anna and how everything had fallen apart so rapidly. He wasn't the same individual I'd seen previously. There was a fragility to him that I'd never seen before. He wasn't merely the boisterous, opinionated brother who always had a quip ready. He was a person, and I could see how deeply this was affecting him. It caught me completely off guard. He said, his voice softer than usual, "One minute everything was okay, and the next, Anna informs me she's leaving. It's like I don't even recognize her anymore." I sympathized with him, I truly did. But I also understood that I couldn't let my compassion warp my perspective. He wasn't the first person to experience a hard breakup, and he wouldn't be the last. I needed to remain resolute. Initially, everything was normal. Nathan stayed in his room for the most part, emerging only for work or when we ate together. But then, as time passed, things began to get peculiar. It started with little things. He would always leave dirty dishes in the sink. It wasn't a catastrophe, but I had made it clear that I wasn't going to clean up after him. Then I started seeing his possessions slowly spreading out. His shoes were near the door, and a jacket was tossed over my couch. It wasn't a huge issue, but it felt like he was beginning to get too relaxed. He seemed to be ignoring the boundaries I had set. One day, I came home from my job and found him on the couch, engrossed in his phone. He looked up at me and told me he was considering a trip to the store later. Did I need anything? I responded, trying to sound normal, that he could just buy whatever he needed. But as soon as I stepped into the kitchen, I spotted the credit card statement on the counter. Nathan's name was at the top of the bill. There was a nearly $500 charge from a store I'd never heard of. I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. I knew exactly what this meant. Nathan had started spending money he didn't have. I went over, grabbed the bill, and looked at the transactions. They were mainly from expensive restaurants. These were the sorts of spots I was sure Anna wouldn't allow him to visit, at least not without her. I held up the bill and asked Nathan, "What is this?" He stopped talking, a look of fear taking over his face. "Oh, I plan to pay it back," he stuttered. "It's just been difficult, adjusting to everything." I could feel my frustration building. This wasn't just a simple mistake. I knew better. He'd been piling up expenses using my money with no intention of ever reimbursing me. This wasn't about a relative requiring assistance. This was all about Nathan exploiting the circumstances. "Nathan," I said, striving to keep my tone even as frustration was starting to bubble up inside. "I believe you need to go." His eyes grew larger. "What? No, Ryan, please." "No, you've worn out." "You're welcome," I stopped him. "This isn't the arrangement we made." I didn't understand how he imagined this would play out, but I was not going to allow him to take advantage of me while he dealt with his own struggles. "You need to collect your belongings and sort things out for yourself." Nathan said nothing after that. He packed his stuff, and soon enough he was out the door. I remained standing there watching him go, and for the first time in weeks I felt a bit better. It wasn't simple. Evicting a member of the family rarely is, but I realized I'd made the correct choice. Nathan needed to address his issues on his own, not by sponging off of me and behaving as if nothing was awry. That evening, I sat down and reflected on everything. The divorce, the stress, the way Nathan had behaved as though my limits meant nothing. Ultimately, I was sure of one thing. I wouldn't allow anyone, including a family member, to disregard my feelings ever again. It wasn't a cheerful conclusion, but it was my resolution, and at last that seemed to suffice.